Hey, good morning. It's Pastor Doug. I'm here with our next study, Chapter 8, None of These Diseases, going through this great study by S.I. McMillan. Hope that you've been enjoying it. I certainly have. And this is our last one in this section that's talking about sexuality. And this one's actually titled The Superlatives of Sex. Probably won't hear that very often in the Sunday school class. We're going to be just diving right into this, but I think you'll learn some things about God's Word that will help you in your life. He begins this chapter with an anecdotal example of marital problems. He says there is this wife, mother of five, comes into his office. She's complaining, I can't sleep, I can't eat, I just can't enjoy anything anymore. The problem was, she goes on to explain, is that her husband is going out once a week, going to a very expensive hotel, playing cards with his friends to the wee hour of the morning, and then coming back in. And she assures the doctor that everything's on the up and up. That is, there's no other women involved. And then she goes on to say, well, I know I'm kind of foolish, but the way I look at it, we just have to watch every penny. We barely get by. Whenever I suggest that we go out, Gil says that we just can't afford it, can't afford the babysitters, and then he takes what little money we have and he spends it on himself. And as a result, there's this considerable resentment on her part. She says there's this tension between us, and we just don't enjoy things anymore. The conclusion that the good doctor makes is simply this: their marriage is falling apart. Obvious to anyone who hears about it. And he says the reason it's falling apart is because the cohesion, the binders that are holding it together aren't strong anymore. He says the password to a marriage happiness is together. Live together, play together, work together, think together, plan together. You just need to do things together. Two people will not stay together if there isn't a binding force or several binding forces at work in their lives together. And sexuality is a short-lived binder. He says as the sex marriages in Hollywood have long demonstrated, remember he was writing back in 1963, we could look at the examples of those touted relationships that are based on their enjoyment physically of one another, and they just don't last that long. If sex is the only cohesion, the only binder that many couples know, and as a result of that, whenever they start losing interest with one another or something comes in the way of that interest, it begins to have trouble, their marriages start to fall apart. So it shouldn't be strange, as he said back then, 1 in 3 marriages fell, but today it's every 1 in 2. There are a lot of good binders in a relationship. There are affinities, things that we like to do together and enjoy doing together. But husbands and wives don't always do everything together. We have our own interests, our own likes in things. There's affection. We feel good when we see each other and we touch each other. And we have emotional bonds that bind us together. We have common friends. Maybe some that we bring into our relationship, others that we meet as a couple. We have these friendship circles that we move and act and operate in, sort of like an extended family that sort of holds us together. There are common passions that we have, things that we get very strong emotionally about and feel strong about and give us purpose and direction. Even our common work and the things that we do to work and how we enjoy the common way we use our recreation time and our downtime. There are a lot of binders, but all those kinds of binders will fail. Now, they may not all fail at the same time, but they will fail. There's only one binder that never fails, and we learn from Corinthians the 13 that is love. Love never fails. Now, what kind of love binds people together is certainly not puppy love. You know, that kind of love where someone looks at each other and it's good and it's happy and before they start trying to figure out how to get through the difficulties in life, where they don't always see things eye to eye. They don't always have the same affinities in there. People have a clear understanding of what sex is and the enjoyment of it, but they don't have any idea what love is. In fact, if you turn to a dictionary, you're going to find a lot of sub-definitions about love. The one that he was using gave 8 different answers. He goes, if there's 8 different answers for what love is, no wonder people is confused. He said, at least the kind of love that he wants to work with and operate from is this definition: an outward reach of the mind to help and please others. Now, there's some things for me that was missing from that definition, like it's got to get out of the mind. I like the idea of helping and pleasing others. It sort of resonates with what we find as the definition of agape kind of love, that love that's based in serving others, independent of their response to that help. And so there's got to be that practical application, that getting it out of the mind and into the hands and the feet, and having those practical aspects of it. We might even at this point, which he didn't talk about it, but there are other books that do, that talk about the language of love. How do we express in those practical kinds of ways how we feel towards someone in a way that they understand that that's an expression of love? Might not be the same. We may need to learn one another's love language. His definition is definitely not based in sexuality. But he says, without this sort of love at the basis, the superlatives that people seek in their sex life simply cannot be attained. I thought it was an interesting word choice, superlatives. You know what superlatives are: biggest, best, most, highest, longest, furthest. He says those are the kinds of things that people long for in their sex life, and they're told they're supposed to be achieving. And when they don't have those things, they think something is wrong. He gives an anecdotal example of at least a probably made-up name that he used, Guy Bullen. He says that his philosophy of life is look out for number one. Now, you may not express it that way, but you probably know a lot of people who operate with that philosophy in mind. It takes him continents away from the superlatives of sex in his life, and he doesn't even realize it. He perpetually berates the way his wife for all of her faults. He must be a perfectionist, saying that she doesn't measure up, pointing out all the problems with her. And because he's always berating her, he just can't understand why she doesn't exhibit any enthusiasm whenever he approaches her for that physical touch. And so, since he's not getting what he wants from her, he turned to several love affairs, none of which brought him satisfaction. Our good doctor says variety and frequency is a mocking substitute for what only love can attain in those relationships. Although he's highly sexed, he's really getting nothing from it and got nothing from it because he's lacking love in those relationships. That's not, you can't have a momentary experience of pleasure, but you're not going to experience the superlatives in it. As a result, he was always disappointed, always frustrated. His resentment toward others are largely responsible, the doctor said, for some physical, psychosomatic kind of problems. He said because of this problem with love, he has high blood pressure. These emotional upsets trigger his asthma, and he's just having a lot of problems because he doesn't have love in his life in it. Carl Jung, however you want to pronounce that good psychiatrist's name, says there are a lot of people like Guy. They have illnesses, they have unhappiness in their lives because they know nothing about love, and the closest thing they get is that physical experience of sex, and it's lacking because there is no love. He says people like that have no understanding because they've failed to read the meaning of their own existence. We would probably say they've not read the instruction manual, the Bible, which reveals to us the importance and place in love in all of our relationships and all of our expressions and experiences in that relationship, which lead us to the very best, the superlatives. Couples are unhappy because they simply don't know the difference between love and sex. Sometimes that's because, where do people get their definition of what love is? From the novels they read, from the movies they watch, from the TV programs they've seen, from the magazines that they cruise through. The internet now They see a lot of things and they look at a lot of things. We entertain ourselves with romantic novels and romantic comedies, and there's always some triad relationship, and one is good as one is bad, and you're trying to pull from them to get the right person, and they don't always make the right choices. But if you were to use that as your only way to kind of figure out what love is, you would be confused. You wouldn't know what love really is, and so you wouldn't really be able to have it in your life. He says, just as an example, if you only know puppy love, you're just going to end up leading a dog's life. Kind of like that phrase. And another anecdotal example from a lady that he dealt with, he called her Yvonne. He said she was in her office. She had some obvious physical bruises from a fight, and he was listening to the explanation, and she said, I was just kidding whenever I said something about Mike's mother. Then he got mean about it, and he said something awful about my mother, and so I slapped him because he deserved it, and then that brute punched me in the face. I don't know how you would respond to someone confessing to that kind of unhealthy, abusive relationship. Her response of all that is, I'm just not taking this anymore, and I'm taking the kids, I'm moving out, I'm going to my mother's house. He said that he gave her some all too late marriage advice. In every marriage, he said, situations arise in which one of the partners must give in out of consideration and love for the other partner. Don't feel sorry for yourself if you have to give in most of the time. That's not healthy. That's not where you want things to be. But you need to start working so that it becomes equal in that aspect of mutual love for one another. When you give in, you're losing your life in the one and only way you will find your life and find worthwhile happiness. Man, that almost sounds like Jesus. That's dangerously close to the gospel. The secret of happiness in marriage depends on each person making small sacrifices readily and happily in order to express love to one another. He told Yvonne, you tell me you love Mike, but what kind of love is it? Is it the kind of love that suffers long? Is it the kind of love that's kind? You know where he's going. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. You've heard it in all those weddings that you've gone to. Love is patient. Love is kind. It envies not. Love is not boastful or conceited or rude or selfish, not quick to take offense. It keeps no records of wrongs. There's nothing that love cannot face. There's no limit to its faith, its hope, its endurance. Love never fails. Love is a basic necessity, not just for obtaining the superlatives of sex, but to obtaining the superlatives in life. A man named Dr. Smiley Blanton that he refers to had spent 40 years as a medical professional, and he said over those 40 years, one thing stood out to him more than anything else with all the patients that he treated. He says that no one can survive without love. It's a universal need. Sex and marriage should be an expression of that love, but there's no sexual ecstasy without love. You've got to have that as the foundation. Couples must develop this intense awareness of each other's needs and desires and commit themselves to taking care of the other person, meeting their needs with one another. And then you'll be amazed at the response whenever you approach one another. Wrangling during the day will make sex lifeless and mechanical, if not repulsive. Couples often think that whenever they're not enjoying sex anymore, that there's something wrong, and so they don't get these superlatives anymore. They seek someone out to help them fix the problem. However, they're usually looking for a pill or a prescription or something like that, and they don't want to hear the truth. But the problem is, they no longer have that binder of love in place. They've got a lot of things that have clouded it up and messed it up and broken it down, and there needs to be some help to restore the love in their life for one another. You may have heard of Eric Fromm, F-R-O-M-M. Even though his book was in 1963, most of us have heard his name, and we've taken a basic general psych class. And he said, I didn't realize this, but he said that love thy neighbor as thyself is the most important norm for living, and its violation is the basic cause of unhappiness and mental illness. I didn't see the report on that, but it sounds reasonable. He was in analytic therapy, and he said analytic therapy, which is what he did, was essentially an attempt to help the patient gain or regain his capacity for love. If this aim is not fulfilled, he said, only surface changes will be made and nothing substantial, and they'll return to their unhappiness. Love is essential to happiness. It's food for the soul. The difference, he went on to talk about how men and women relate to this food for the soul, is that sometimes men can survive on the purely physical act, focused on the mechanical, and they think sometimes that's enough, even though they don't realize it isn't, not even for men. He said women are more fully aware of thoughtfulness, of fidelity, of acts of love, of attempts for pleasing, and all of those come together for them in order to fully enjoy those physical expressions of love that couples long to enjoy together. So part of the problem of not having happiness in that area of our lives is maturity. He says, you look at an infant, they have no obligation to give. An infant receives and is expected to give nothing else. He says that partners need to grow out of their infantile inclinations and learn to enjoy giving more than receiving. Again, that sounds a lot like the Bible. The Bible in 1 Corinthians 13 talked about this idea of childishness. If you start in the first of the chapter, it talks about things that are really good, things that are important, things that would get you noticed, things that would give you notoriety, skills and gifts and talents, especially in the church. People might notice them and give you accolades for them. He's saying, if any of those things are done without love, they are absolutely meaningless acts. In other words, you're not going to get out of them what you want out of them. Kind of reminded me of Ananias and Sapphira, who looked at Barnabas, who was getting all of the love from the congregation because he'd taken a field and sold it to help the difficulties in their congregation. They had a lot of widows, and those widows weren't being taken care of by their family. He saw that. He sacrificed himself in that way. He provided for them, and he got a nickname called the Son of Encouragement, called him Barnabas. So Ananias and Sapphira see that, and then they say, man, we want that kind of life. We want that kind of superlative in our life. We really don't want to give up everything. Now, they could have chosen to give it a portion of it, but they didn't. They gave a portion and lied. Now, they could have fooled everyone else, but you can never fool God. And I don't think people who live a lie really achieve these superlatives. It's always that nagging part of their lives that they really aren't loving. And since they aren't loving, they don't have that basic relationship with others that is expressed in the superlatives, the best, the most, the longest. And toward the end of that chapter, 13 in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, when I was a child, my speech and my outlook and my thoughts were all childish. I thought as a child, I lived as a child, but when I became a man, when I became mature, I put away childish things. What he kept was faith, hope, and love, greatest of those being love. But that means you move from being a child, give me, to someone who's mature. Let me give you, let me give you, let me give you. There's a good story that Dr. McMillan in here brought up. I know it's going to surprise you, called The Prodigal Son. It's a story where immaturity defines this young son, and he goes to his father and says, give me my inheritance, give me my freedom to go in the far land. I want to go and live life and enjoy the superlatives in life, and I can't find them here. And so you give me so I can go and enjoy the best. And so he goes. He gets away from his father's rules. He takes all of his money. He goes into that prodigal style of living, whatever that is, with women, with friends, with all kinds of things. He was free to live as he wanted to, and it bound him for a while. But when those binders started running out, like his funds to continue the friendships, when all those things started going away, he was miserable. He was unhappy. He was so low that he ended up working for a farmer, feeding the pigs. He got so hungry because he was even mistreated by that farmer that he was thinking that slop looked good. And that's when he came to his senses. He said, even the servants in my father's house have it better than this. And so he goes from a person that started out with that childish give me to that mature make me a servant. Make me a servant. That's all I'm asking for. When we come back to God, we come back to him, and we're longing for the superlatives of life. We're longing for the reestablishment of love for us and through us. And we say, just make me a servant. And like the Father embraces the Son and says, I'm going to do more. I'm going to restore you as my son. Well, God embraces us that way too. He restores us. And he makes us, that love is bound again. Some couples need to go through a prodigal son experience. They need to return to one another. And they need to offer one another forgiveness. They need to admit what they've done, and they need to return to each other with that mature attitude of saying, let me be a servant in your life to one another. So it becomes clear that it is vital for love. And if you're going to enjoy even the superlatives of the physical expressions of that love in that one aspect of sex, it's not going to happen without love. You might go through the mechanics, you might go through the emotions, but you're not going to reach the superlatives without love. Love will prevent the frustrations and the unhappiness. It will move you away from those a divorce whenever there's no binders left in a relationship, which God hates because he doesn't want us to experience a life without love. I mean, God is love. He wants us to experience him and all that he has for us in our relationships with one another. And so, we can kind of go back to that Beatles song and end it that way. All you need is love, but you need the right kind of love. I don't think the Beatles understood what love really was. They knew the answer. They just didn't have the right definition. The cure for all the ills and wrongs and cares and sorrows and crimes all lie in that one word, love. Love is the divine vitality where everywhere it is, it produces and restores life. It is obtained, our good doctor says, as well as the scriptures, when God, who is love, opens the doors of our heart and enters in and resides and fills us with his love so that we are overflowing. And that it becomes a hallmark of who we are in our relationships. Love is maintained whenever we listen to God's word, we hear his commands, and we put it into practice, and his commands are not burdensome. Jesus summed them up as saying, love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. And definitely, husbands, love your wives, and wives, love your husbands. Could talk about that in Ephesians 5, but that'd be a whole nother chapter. Hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and we will talk to you later. May God bless you.